Strong dialogue, political theme, and some military action. Sounds like Carnahan's back. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, and yes, it is true, Matthew Michael Carnahan is back to discuss his new film, Lions for Lambs. This episode was recorded earlier in the year, near the film's release, but I decided to hold it so that it would be played out a bit further into the awards season. It was great to have Carnahan back. He's always interesting, and I think you're really going to enjoy this Q&A, which interestingly took place a few days before the writer's strike, so we get into that a little bit towards the end too. And I really got to say, if this film is still in theaters near you, or if you're listening to this by the time the film's out on DVD, you should really give it a chance, because I got to say, I do not agree with most of the reviews that were written about it. I feel like a lot of critics kind of missed what this film was going for. I think it's a very smart political piece that kind of examines actually apathy in America more than anything else. And it seems like that message was kind of lost on some people. So definitely check it out and decide for yourself. And by the way, today's Creative Screenwriting Podcast is sponsored by the all-new Movie Magic Screenwriter 6. Movie Magic Screenwriter is professional screenwriting software used by top Hollywood screenwriters and TV writers. Stop by Screenplay.com to test drive the new Movie Magic Screenwriter 6, and while you're there, read some free screenwriting articles and interviews with some of the most successful screenwriters working today. The all-new Movie Magic Screenwriter 6 is available at Screenplay.com. But now, without further ado, let's jump right onto the stage of our sold-out screening of Lions for Lambs right after I introduce screenwriter Matthew Michael Carnahan. Right there. Have a seat. Long time no see, man.
Yeah.
What's it been, 3.5 weeks since your last movie?
Is that how it always is supposed to work? I do one of these every couple months.
I mean, it's pretty amazing that you had The Kingdom and then 3 weeks later this. Obviously, people love, your light little poetic writings,
my Disney movies.
Disney movies, family films. Who doesn't like a good family film?
Especially where the family gets blown up.
Yeah, that's right. We covered a lot of your breaking in story the last time we spoke, and obviously the Kingdom podcast is in iTunes. Of special note, last Saturday night, someone wrote me from Iraq in the military who's a podcast listener, which I was blown away by. I thought that was awesome. So we're gonna actually just jump right into this. Talk about where the idea came for Lions for Lambs. How did you get the idea to write this?
It always wigs me out the first time I look up, which is why I always sit like this. It really, two areas. First, in the Kingdom, I was desperate to, in the first several drafts, I was desperate to stay in those offices in D.C., because the more I researched that and the more I spent time in the FBI field offices in D.C., kind of the more in love I became with this idea of these seemingly innocuous 30-minute, 45-minute, hour-long meetings in Washington in these otherwise kind of unremarkable rooms that have a ripple effect that, over thousands of people, over thousands of miles. And like I said in the first several drafts of The Kingdom, it was a good hour before they ever got into Saudi Arabia. And Peter Berg finally took me aside at one point and said, kid, we're going to do a movie about a bombing in Saudi Arabia and an investigation. Heaven forbid we have to get to Saudi Arabia. And my God, maybe even by the first act. So it was an education in the $70 million version of a movie. So that was kind of that's where the interest came from. And I was a political science student, so I'd always had an interest in what politics looks like face to face, kind of how the sausage gets made, so to speak. The second part, and the bigger part, and the more personal part, is that I just kind of became disgusted with with the fact that I didn't pay attention and didn't do really much of anything until 1,000 of my countrymen and women had died in a war in Iraq specifically. And I remember kind of having this cognition of, my God, 1,000 people, kind of as many people that went to my high school are now dead, and I couldn't quite remember what the rationale was for the war in Iraq that month, that time frame. It was weapons of mass destruction, and then it was democracy, and then it was stability, and then it was, now it's kind of trying to get out of there with some semblance, some notion that the blood that's been spilled has been worth it. And
that's great news. I didn't know we were getting out of there. Thanks for giving us hope.
Heaven forbid. Heaven forbid. And it really kind of crystallized, and I'm sure you guys are, if you've read anything about this, it's an old rote kind of story by now, but despite the fact that it's old and rote, it's absolutely true. I was flipping through the channels trying to find an SC game 2 falls ago, a football game, and I flipped past CNN, and it was a report about a Humvee that had gone into the Tigris of the Euphrates, that had flipped into, I forget which body of water it was, in Iraq, and 4 or 5 American soldiers had drowned. And I thought, God, what an awful way to die, especially considering you're in a war zone. Ostensibly, you've dodged all the things that can kill you in a war zone, and then you die in something that is almost as tedious as a traffic accident. And it was so awful I couldn't get past the channel fast enough, because heaven forbid that would be bouncing around in my head while I was trying to enjoy my football game. And it kind of that night and really the next morning started to hurtle, that I'm the first one to rant and rave and bitch and complain about the direction of the country and how we're now fighting a war on 2 fronts, when everything I'd ever read military history-wise says that that's the kind of surest way to defeat. You only do that when you're absolutely forced, when you're attacked on 2 fronts. And then you look at a map and you realize the only thing that separates those 2 fronts is a third country in Iran that might despise us more than the countries in which we have soldiers. And obviously, I could go on and on and on about it, but all that ranting and raving never really got me off my ass. It never prompted me to stand up and do anything. I fancy myself a writer. I hadn't even written to a congressman or a senator or an editor, so I would rant and rave and then stay seated. And shortly thereafter, I started writing this, and it selfishly was just a way to kind of feel like I was doing something, to kind of exercise this guilt that I have on really, I don't want to sound like a martyr, but like on a daily basis, that now in upwards of 4,000 of my countrymen and women, people pledge the allegiance to the same flag I do and talk like I do and have the same culture I do and have the same touchstones I do, have died. And it's been 6 years since kind of the darkest day, at least in my memory. And the 3 men most responsible for that, from my perspective, again, Mullah Omar, Osama bin Laden, and Ayman al-Zawahiri, still walk the earth, still breathe the same air we do, still threaten us with these vicious little missives every 3 or 4 months, audio tape, videotape, whatever. And I just didn't know how we got to that point. And I didn't pay attention when I think something could have averted that path. So that's where the movie came from.
I have a lot of respect for you because, rather than just writing it, the next hip cop thriller for a paycheck, you decided to, at the beginning of your career, as The Kingdom and other things were formulating, just write something for yourself. When you started writing this, it just as easily could have been a play. I mean,
It was.
Was that your initial concept?
Yeah. Because I just thought, a story that's 2/3 talking stood little chance of ever getting made, independently or otherwise. So I was living in Chicago at the time, and I thought, my abiding ambition was to write this and take it to the Steppenwolf in Chicago, which I think is the best theater in the country, and just get it produced there. And then the more I started writing these helicopter scenes, military scenes, especially that helicopter scene, because I thought it was absolutely intrinsic to everything else in the movie. kind of quickly realized I don't know of a stage in existence where you could accommodate a CH-46 Chinook helicopter. So,
but there was a helicopter in Miss Saigon. I must point that out.
Absolutely, and there was a helicopter in Rushmore. In that stage play.
Very good.
Yeah,
touche.
Yeah, and that probably would have looked a lot better than anything I could have come up with on. Yeah.
Well, so once you knew it wasn't going to be a play, I mean, did you ever have a concept of fleshing out the locales, or just keeping it in 2 offices and on a plateau in Afghanistan?
I was gonna kind of fall on my sword on that one. I didn't want to. That's why I wrote it right from scratch and kind of from my own gut, because I wasn't. I would have rather killed it than let it become something else. I don't think you can delve into these questions. I don't think you can get anywhere near answers, which I certainly don't have, unless you flesh out exactly kind of what the questions are. And I didn't know how to do that other than kind of what you see on the screen. So I was, regardless of the money anybody was going to throw at me, I was going to, like I said, fall on my sword if anybody tried to screw with that, kind of the basic structure of it.
Something that's really interesting that you did, I mean, aside from the 3 stories, and I want to hear how those kind of percolated in your mind, you also kept your character count really low, which is great, because it's basically 2 lead characters per story, which I think is always the solution for success, because too many characters just would dilute everything.
Muddles everything up. I just, because I knew it was going to, these questions aren't easy to get out, and you just can't say them without context and not sound simplistic. So I thought maybe the easiest way to streamline things and kind of rip things down to the bare bones is just have as few characters, integral characters, as possible.
You were an IR poli-sci major at USC. Were you kind of the student? Did you have a teacher who inspired you like that?
Absolutely. I mean, that kid channeled me too. It's creepy. I was that much of a beanpole. I was that skinny and cocky and geeky and had nothing to base it on. He did a perfect job. I even wore those idiot shirts, the Rain Spooners. Proudly, I wore those things. I was in a fraternity. Yeah, so absolutely. But I also kind of clued in early that and this is, again, forgive me if it sounds cocky, I had a pretty good sense that I could do a little bit less than most and still get by with pretty good marks. And I could, when in doubt, I could smile or say something witty or crack a joke, and that seemed to trump any assignment that I'd missed or the fact that I was late, or I could be a good smartass about it, and if you could get the professor laughing about it, you were good. And that was a good chunk of my time at SC was spent kind of assiduously studying how I could do the very least I could and still get by, with grades my parents would be proud of. That was
so. Which story came first? Was it the student that came first to you, and then
the soldiers?
The soldiers. Okay,
the soldiers came first.
Then how'd you decide on the senator and the journalist?
Because I wanted to come up with the most compelling arguments for the war I could, and just from my own eyes looking at it, I thought that, and believe me, there's a lot of what Irving Cruz's character says that I wholeheartedly believe. I don't think you unilaterally pull out of 2 countries you have invaded and in many ways kind of broken down to very basic elements, and then because of the political heat at home, you pull out and doom tens of millions of people that are kind of counting on you to make good on your word. And I think if you do that, you have an infinitely worse world 5 years down the road than we have right now. So I wanted to kind of come up with those types of arguments to justify in some way why those kids were in that kind of harrowing position in the first place. And again, I think we might get in trouble for it too, because I have such a problem with the media's, at least the widespread kind of television media's coverage of at least the run-up to Iraq, the run-up to the invasion.
Yeah, there were no questions asked whatsoever.
Absolutely, and I feel like, God damn it, I have this sense that journalism really should be, as naive as it might sound, really should be kind of a Jeffersonian vision of journalism. They should be the fourth estate of government. They should be kind of prompting the citizenry to ask questions, asking it for us, kind of. That's their job. While we're doing our own jobs, that's their job. And I feel like there was just kind of gross misconduct in that regard, played to absolute devastating effect, I think, by the administration, because it was like, you either play ball or you don't get a ride on the tanks. You play ball or you don't get to ride with us in to the heart of Iraq and get all that great footage. That journalism character is as good as I wanted to make her. I also kind of imbued that character with a lot of faults and a lot of not conscious faults even, but things that happen to everybody. You get more responsibility. Your parents get sick. You have children. You have a sick child. That necessitates decisions that might not always be the most idealistic and the most honorable. And I just wanted to play that out to full effect in some kind of larger way to explain why these guys were there.
The classic, everybody has their reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you have a really original voice for dialogue. Again, it was strong, just as it was in The Kingdom. And this is a really dialogue-heavy movie. Talk about your process for writing dialogue, not writing yourself into, the most vacuous of debates. Do you talk it out? How do you know how long to let them debate?
I wish I had I think if I had a kind of a pat answer, I'd write a book and make a lot more money than I do now. I don't know. It's just and some days are better than others, as anyone who's written before can attest. This one was a lot easier than most, only because I had been kind of thinking about these things and pondering these things. And
right, because you became a screenwriter after 9/11, basically. So it was always kind of important to you.
Exactly. It's kind of the seed of the biggest change I've made in my life to this point. And I don't know. I don't know my process.
Do you talk it out? Do you talk it out when you write? No? Okay.
I just kind of dive into it, and I try to be as kind of, I don't know if this is the right adjective even, but just as violent and original with it as I can possibly be. And if I can read it back and it sounds like my voice and it sounds like things I haven't heard before, I know I'm getting closer to what I want to show other people.
When you're constructing your arguments, because there's basically four big debates in the film. Obviously, the war's the easy one, but there's the two classroom sequences and then the Abrams in '68. How did you kind of pepper those arguments? Because I'm guessing at the beginning of writing an argument like that, you know who's going to win, and then do you write to get to that point?
I truly don't.
Okay.
I really don't. I tried to, in this movie or this script in particular, I tried to kind of go into each scene with as much of a blank slate as possible. I mean, I knew how I wanted to wrap things up, but
were you working from an outline?
No, not at all.
Interesting.
Not at all. I mean, it really truly kind of poured out of me, for better or worse. It just the first version, the first draft was 90 pages, and I think I wrote it in a month. It was just.
And the movie's about 88 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm actually surprised you didn't have a really long first version with all the...
No. In fact, it's weird. It's strange, but the first draft was the shortest of all the drafts. It was, yeah.
What was the production draft?
I think it tallied at 106 pages. Yeah, between 106 and 107, there was a space nobody could get out of the document. For some reason. They finally did, and now it's 106. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. Transitions are always important in writing. A lot of writers aren't so conscious of them, but I mean, you were tying them with your dialogue. One of my favorites was when the Army guy says, "I would love to talk to motherfucker," that said that LZ was safe, and it cuts right to Tom Cruise in the office, like giving his speech. Yeah. You're very conscious of transitions. It's important for a movie like this. Talk about using that while you're writing, or was that something that you would pepper in later after you had completed your first draft and gotten it out of you?
No, and many of the better ones came later while we were on set, and you just kind of figure out what works, and anytime you can get Berg to say motherfucker, it comes so naturally to him. You gotta, you're just taking advantage of his natural ability there. One of his God-given talents is to swear, and but while I was writing it, because I wanted this thing to feel kind of like a chain link, that one scene would lead into the next, and you would kind of, despite the fact that all these three storylines are happening, the other two storylines are happening when you're in the Senate. Ostensibly that same period of time is passing. And I felt like the onus was on me to make sure those transitions were good, so you never were thinking, God, what did they just say? What did they say while I was on the ridge? I wanted all of it to kind of feel natural and linked together, so you were aware of the fact that time had actually passed in that office, but you weren't trying to figure out what they were talking about while you were away, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, and your scenes really don't overstay their welcome. Talk about the title of the film, Lions for Lambs, where that quote came from and when you knew it was going to be your title.
Yeah, I was watching the military channel, believe it or not, because I am kind of a military history geek, and it was a story about World War I, this show about World War I, and one of the vignettes was this story about how impressed the Germans were with British grunts. They were they'd gone through, I think it was Belgium and short order, and had gotten into France in short order, and then they came up against the Brits and were blown away at how tough they were. They never thought that they would have an enemy that strong, at least as strong as they were. And word had gotten back to the fatherland that things had bogged down, and in large part because of the Brits. And a field marshal wrote a letter home to kind of boost spirits and said, yeah, these are the toughest guys we've ever come across. The grunts are, but they're as great as their officers are horrid. I mean, again, at that time in the British Army, you could essentially buy your officer's commission. So a rich family, if they had kind of a ne'er-do-well son, they could buy them an officer's commission, and lo and behold, this guy's now leading men. And they wasted hundreds of thousands of great kind of tough soldiers that way. And this German field marshal said in this letter, don't fear, because nowhere have I seen such lions led by such lambs. So eventually, that kind of intrinsic problem with the British Army, we'll be able to exploit that. And I remember watching that and thinking, my God, if that doesn't really kind of crystallize what I think is going on right now, I think, not to pander either, but I really think some of our best and brightest people are in uniform thousands of miles away as we're talking right now, kind of in the middle of some of the more harrowing fights for their lives I could think of. And I think they were sent there in large part by men who weren't, and women who weren't our best and brightest, and in many cases actively avoided fighting when it was their time during Vietnam. I mean, Ashcroft with his 6 deferments, and Cheney with his deferments, and Rumsfeld, who I don't think ever served, and that's
president.
where
You forgot the president, of course.
Well, yeah, heaven forbid I make some comment about his Air National Guard service and how he was flying outdated Soviet bomber interceptors when we were fighting a jungle war, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, that's where the title came from, and I just thought it really kind of rang true for me anyway.
What I love about this movie, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think our best and brightest are some of the people that are serving this country right now. I've been saddened by the way they're left out to dry when they come home. I've been saddened by the extended tours of duty that they're doing, and just a complete lack of leadership. But interestingly, your film, aside from having an anti-war tone, is really a motivational tone against the apathy of our general consumer populist.
Yeah.
So talk about that concept of the battle that Redford's actually fighting is the battle of apathy.
Yeah, and it was just, it's a large part of my personal experience when I was in college, which I talked about, and then just the sense that somebody said, and it was before I started writing this, it was one of my friends, and I can't remember who, but we were out in Chicago, and they said, what's amazing is that there's not a single anti-war song out right, not one. I think outside of Neil Young, which who knew Neil Young would write an anti-war song. no contemporary, modern, younger artists almost like had the balls to come out with an anti-war song.
That was probably after the Dixie Chicks were ostracized for speaking out against the war.
I mean, they were butchered, but and that's the thing. It's easy for me to jump on the bandwagon now, but when they first said that, I remember thinking, God, what are they doing? What are they doing? We're in the middle of a war, and they can't shut up long enough to. I mean. To be absolutely honest, I was kind of fully on board with, thinking, well, they're going to get everything they deserve, and only later do you realize that, there were some pioneers out there that kind of saw things first and foremost and took it on the chin because of that foresight, and I was a part of that problem, that apathy and that kind of like this sense that there's no way these guys could start a war and be either lying or so grossly misinformed about the reason they're starting the war. So and they got Colin Powell in front of the UN, he's making a case. The guy seemed to be legit and honorable. There's no way this isn't true. There's no way this isn't right.
I mean, except if you were looking at the British newspapers and some of the other places.
Or the Italian newspapers or the German newspapers.
But I mean, it's interesting about the apathy because, it's part of the campaign on this movie, and I rarely ever talk about them, was at the Lions for Lambs website. They have this YouTube State Your Cause.
Yeah.
And they allow you to go for any cause that you want to stand up for. I mean, whatever it is. Talk about that. Is that something that you hope the movie instills, is people to get off their asses?
Well, that would be something. I mean, that'd be something, and it's almost like I hate to even admit that's what I'm aiming for fear that it won't come true. You state your wish out loud and you're screwed. All I'm trying to do really is in the most kind of entertaining way I could get people to think about really difficult questions that are all too easy to look away from right now. Get people to think about things like 4,000 of their countrymen have died, and is one more life worth it? Is 100 more lives worth it? Is another year and another untold billions in treasure worth it? And kind of what am I doing on a daily basis to keep that kind of somewhere in my mind, and I was as guilty of it as the next person. And it's just so easy to turn the channel. It's so easy to turn away from it. You almost don't even have to try. So that's what I was trying. I was just trying to kind of get the questions as in the best possible way I could put them front and center.
Right, because the answers are pretty hard to kind of knock. I mean,
and I would never be so presumptuous as to think I have anything like answers, especially in an hour and a half movie,
What year did you start writing this? I forgot to ask because the war started in 2003.
2 falls ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask you about, their motivation in the Army. I love the motivation that they're going to use the GI Bill to go to college.
Yeah.
They're going to come out debt-free. But it is interesting that someone so philosophical as Arian and Ernest decide to join up.
Yeah.
I mean, to really stand up for what they believe in rather than try and make change at home. Because, I mean, if there's one place that has no interest in philosophy, it's usually the Army, any army in the world. They're not really open to change. Talk about that.
Yeah. Much of those characters are based on 2 of my closest friends, at least in elementary school, one of whom was Mexican American, the other one was African American, and when I, as can happen, we go to junior high and then high school, and by the time we're in high school, it's like we didn't even know each other anymore. They had gone with their crowd, and I had gone with my crowd, and we kind of came back together toward the end of high school. One of them got in real trouble, and that kind of brought the 3 of us back together for a split second. And I went off to college, and the last I heard, they had both together had gone off to the Marines. And I had, I to this day, I still have kind of a guilt about that because it's like, maybe the 3 of us should have done that. My brother and I are the first 2 in my family to have not served, the first 2 males anyway, in the entire Carnahan family not to have served. my great-grandfather in World War I, my grandfather in World War II, my dad in Vietnam. And I tried to kind of think of those two guys and kind of why they did it, because they were genuinely good human beings, and I think in places they wouldn't admit in public, they really did have an interest in their country and making a change. And for me, that kind of became crystal when I heard that they had gone off to the Marines.
This isn't an easy sell. What was it like to set this project up? I mean, it's technically the first film under Tom Cruise at United Artists. How hard was it to bring over there?
I have to be honest, it wasn't really that hard at all. I mean, the thing is, it's like lightning striking in the same spot over and over and over again. It was, I had originally turned down State of Play to write this.
State of Play, an adaptation of the BBC series.
Yeah, and I was given that opportunity because of The Kingdom, and Donna Langley at Universal had, before she was even in the position she was in now, was kind of one of the biggest proponents of The Kingdom over there. And then she saw, the last version, and then State of Play was on their desk, and she said, you should write this. And I kind of pondered it and watched the miniseries and just fell in love with it. But I had this idea bouncing around in my head, and said no. She called back, and again, one of those great moments where you actually listen to someone's advice, where she said, this is a pretty big project, and really should do it. Should really give it a shot. So I said yes and did that, and then when that got the kind of reception it got, and when people hear Brad Pitt and now he's going to play Cal McCaffrey, and they're going to go into production, and I think then when I turned in the first draft of State of Play and I was kind of waiting for the notes on the second, that's when I really did the lion's share of work on this, and I think when I finished it, and word was that I had the spec script, there were many more people interested because of State of Play. So the serendipity of it all is wonderful, and it went to Kevin Huvane, who read it and loved it. And when I was writing Janine, when I was writing that character, the only person I could think of is Meryl Streep. I don't know how you write an American woman and not have her at the top of your list. And it went to her, and I'll never forget the phone call. It was July, I think, late July. And Huvane called and said, she's 75 pages through it, but she's in. She's in. And it's one of those moments where you tear the little day out of the calendar and save the message and contemplate retiring right there so it can never get bad. And once she put her stamp on it, her imprimatur on it, then it went to a kind of the best echelon you could be in, and Redford called. It was a complete Hail Mary, because I thought when I was writing The Professor, my God, it would be something if Robert Redford or Clint could play that professor, and then I quickly shut up and kind of chastise myself and be like, hey, asshole, you can't say that out loud even if there's nobody else in the room. You're gonna jinx yourself. But yeah, once Meryl was in, then it was like, yeah, let's show it to Robert Redford. And he called, and in short order, just a few days later, called on his way to Hawaii, and he was in a terminal at an airport. So I knew it was pretty serious. He was going to take time on his way to a vacation with his family to call. And I talked to him, and he had a couple of really great questions. And
like what? Do you remember?
What's the if you had to give me kind of a through line that connected all of these stories, what is it? And just kind of off the top of my head, I said, well, in each scene, somebody's trying to change something that's otherwise inert. The professor's trying to change the kid, the senator's trying to change the reporter, and these two kids are trying to change the fact that they're facing certain death if they don't get moving, if they can't get together and get out. And that seemed to impress him, even though I was just grasping at that time. And that prompted another meeting and another phone call, and eventually he just he's a wonderful, wonderful guy, because my wife was pregnant and she was 2 days out from the due date, and he wanted to meet. He wanted to have kind of the final meeting, and I told him, I said, obviously I'm not flying to Utah when my firstborn could come, while I'm there. And he said, I'll just fly to Chicago, meet you in Chicago. And then I kind of knew, this is a pretty charmed moment. And we met in Chicago and had great pizza and a couple beers, and he said yes. Yeah.
I'm a fan of Gino's East. I hope it was Gino's East pizza in Chicago.
Gino's East is not bad, but Chicago's pizza?
Steady.
Oh, it's the absolute best. Yeah.
Well, so at that point, did you know he wanted to direct too, aside from just being in it? Was that also the first thing he said to you?
That came down very early when he first read the script and expressed interest. He said, I'm not interested in either directing or acting. I'm interested in doing both.
And you don't say no to that.
Yeah, and I said, well, whatever you say, Bob, it's like twist my rubber arm, for God's sake.
Very, very famously, 3 or 4 weeks outside of production, I'm sorry to bring this up, but it's just a strange coincidence. Mission Impossible 3 fell through with your brother Joe Carnahan with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
I find it very interesting that, this was something that Tom Cruise got so involved with, because I just could picture him sitting in an office somewhere reading that script, and he's like, Carnahan.
Yeah.
Why is that name?
Why do I know that name? He's like, wait a minute, this is a great chance to screw Joe. There was, believe me, not to go into detail, but there was madness on both sides of the equation. I'll leave it at that. With Joe and Tom, and they're both these massive kind of personalities. And when it was good, it was great. And when it was bad, it was bad. And again, I think each of them in their own ways have seen that for what it was, and made some, I think, requisite changes. But I got to tell you, and I'm not saying this because he's the head of the studio, I really think he's some of the best stuff about this movie. I think he so kind of embodied this really bright, really driven, neoconservative kind of politician that is at once kind of charming and terrifying. And it's a potent mix, I really think he did a pretty marvelous job.
I have an utterly geeky question, but I've been wanting to ask it. When Meryl Streep's walking around his office looking at all the pictures on the wall, she looks at one of him in his West Point uniform.
Taps.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Because to me, it was almost like that character years later from
absolutely,
Taps.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I could sleep again.
Yeah, assuming he had gotten out of prison after gunning all the guys down with the M60. Yeah.
That's exactly what he would do, though. He would be that guy.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So this is officially a sequel to Taps. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it should be marketed as such.
It will be. When you were writing the stuff about Vietnam, I mean, Bush hadn't even brought up Vietnam yet. So
you mean Iran?
No, about Vietnam. Bush this year acknowledged Vietnam as a connection, which was a surprise, I guess, to a lot of people. What changed as you guys were filming a movie like this, as the politics and the landscape and everything in the real world was changing beside it?
Yeah. That's one of the reasons we went so fast. I mean, this thing...
Was it greenlit?
On October 4th of last year, that's when Redford said he would do it. And then on October 4th of this year, they sent out the print to copy. So quite literally, the 365 days to the day, which is something. And obviously, when you're working with these three people, they do have schedules, and they do have other things that they'd like to do. So that was one concern. And then the other was, let's not bust our ass on this, something that everybody's really passionate about, and then be overtaken by events and kind of be beside the point when things come out. And I was thinking about that while I was writing it. How fluid things can be, and I alluded to it earlier. I just I looked at a map and saw that Iran was the only thing separating the two wars, and my God, wouldn't it be something? You could win a Nobel Peace Prize for it in bizarro world, that the Shiites and Sunnis are coming together to kill American soldiers in more places. It's a 1,300-year-old bloody, vicious fight between these two factions. And wouldn't it be wild if the Shiites kind of turned a blind eye and let Wahhabi and jihadi insurgents hike through Iran to get to Afghanistan to kind of build kind of a more efficient, more deadly army there versus the coalition, versus the states, the UN. So that I kind of postulated that, and then 3 weeks before we wrapped, the story came out that trucks indeed were moving through Iran, and the prevailing opinion was they held fighters and weapons that were going to Afghanistan. And then the Vietnam thing, that's where my dad, just a wealth of this kind of information, and I remember being very young and having discussions with him because I was shocked that growing up in a really tiny town in Michigan, I was shocked that the United States could have done anything other than prevail in a war. And I just remember grilling my dad on what happened in Vietnam. Why isn't that getting the same treatment as World War II? Why aren't you and your friends getting the same treatment as Grandpa and his? And we just started talking about tactics and how at some point they needed a fight. That they needed a fight, so they were sending out smaller and smaller groups to entice the NVA and the VC to actually give that fight. They weren't getting it on the company level. They weren't getting it on the big World War II tank battle level. It was, Panama to hand almost, man on man. And I just postulated that might be a way to engage the insurgents. That might be the only way to engage the insurgents in Afghanistan on a very small kind of level where they think they've got you trapped, and it's a trap you've set for yourself, which ostensibly was the running policy in Vietnam toward the end.
Right. It's also interesting your references to Rome in this movie. Tom Cruise is using a Roman tactic, very proud of it, but we all know what happened with them. But a few more questions. We're opening up to the crowd. I'm just going to talk about the ending really briefly. The end of the three storylines. Aaron and Casey, it's totally inherent in their characters that they're not going to take it laying down. They're going to stand up and die. Was that in every draft? Was that
Ernie and Aaron?
Ernie and Aaron. Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's okay. There
was never any rescue for them in any draft. It was always they're going to stand up and die. That's the end of it. Okay.
God, no.
Did you write it on the page that their life is going to kind of flash back as the gun flashes?
Yeah.
Really, because that was beautiful.
That actually was in an earlier part when Arian is waking up. That's where I wrote the flash, that he kind of has this flash as he's waking up right after they've both been stranded. And David Bilo, one of the assistant editors, said, it would be amazing, I think, let me try something, I'll show it. And he tried it, and the people in the room had tears in their eyes. So that's the one we went with. Meryl
Streep, really quick, dumb question then about her ending. Mm-hmm. She's a journalist. On the wall, she has her article from Time magazine. But she's a print journalist. She's taking shorthand. There's no camera crew with her. But she works in a TV room. I was very confused by that. And then the story that she was going to report, usually it's the AP wire that goes at the bottom of the screen. So I was confused as to what journalistic pursuit.
I kind of based her on two women, the Candy Crowley and CNN, who's done print and is a producer, but is also a reporter. Christiane Amanpour does the same thing, produces a lot of stories, but then will get in front of the camera. And a woman, Elaine Shannon, that I worked with on The Kingdom. She had written for Time, but had also done stuff for MSNBC, and it was being offered a full-time gig there. So I just I thought of Meryl's character, someone who jumped around in journalism, kind of finding their niche.
In an earlier,
she was a producer of stories, kind of like a real reporter at a big 24-hour news network.
In an earlier draft, it's her that comes back and really kills the story and is angry about it. But later on, you had this other editor character that really fights her, breaks her down, reminds her of caring for her mother. So, I mean, is that her giving in at the end with that scroll? Or is that her standing up and leaving her job, and her editor wrote that little scroll at the bottom of the screen because she didn't produce a big feature stand-up for it?
What do you think? The scroll is... He says it at the beginning of the meeting. Well, give me the basics, and we can get them up on the scroll. And that's that's a placeholder. She hasn't written the story or not written the story when she gets in the cab. That's just kind of a placeholder so ANX can put their stamp on the scoop.
Right.
So that's all that is.
But what was her decision? Or are you leaving it open? Okay,
you
good.
tell me.
All right, good. I like you leaving it open. And it also references what Redford is saying about as you get older, it isn't as easy. Finally, the end with Todd. In your original screenplay, his friend says, "So what'd you get? What'd you get in the class? You already know what you got." And the last line of the screenplay is,
I took the B+. I turned it up. This chick's a train wreck.
Yeah, right. And I love the way that you ended the kingdom with really smart dialogue.
Yeah.
But I also thought it was really bright here to not hear his answer as undecided.
Exactly. I thought, again, like my ending with the kingdom, you run the real risk of just pissing people off. Kind of taking them along on this thing, and then almost copping out in the attempt to throw a really hard punch, if that makes any sense. And I also thought, the more my sister is younger, and a lot of the time I've spent with her and her friends, they're very different than me and my friends. They have a much greater sense of kind of the country they live in and the issues they're passionate about. And I thought after a while, well, it's just disingenuous to end it that way. It's not necessarily true, so I shouldn't do it. It's that idea of you write a script and you think of it as something that's being read, and people are grabbed by these parts, but then inevitably you have to put it on screen. You have to present.
So was it your decision or an editorial decision to kill that line?
I honestly, it was mine.
Okay,
kind of
great.
Redford had a problem. He was. I don't know if I want to end it like that. I know I want to end it with a punch, and I said, you know what? Because I'd had more and more problems with it. I loved it when I first wrote it, and it just started.
It's hopeless. It's a hopeless future. He's going to take the B. He doesn't care.
And I just kind of came to this conclusion that it's just a disingenuous thing to do.
Right.
And that was the decision that I got it cut.
We're going to open it up to the crowd for your questions. Right there, you, ma'am, on the aisle. Question was in regards to, did the studio give you any heat about you got to tone it down, go easy on us?
No, not in the least bit. And really not in the least bit. And just in a broader sense, I'm really impressed with how the powers that be have kind of stepped up to make movies about this and put themselves right in the sights of everybody that has an axe to grind or thinks Hollywood should keep its mouth shut. Or I'm very impressed with how people have willingly kind of taken this on.
Yeah, you also had the protection of the studio head being in your movie.
Exactly. I mean, that's also a nice thing to have. But no, we never had anybody saying, we should worry about X, Y, and Z. It was always, we love the script, make it.
Another question. Right here, you, sir, in the second row. Question was in regards to the writing process and managing all three stories. Did you do them separately, or did you just write them kind of 1, 2, 3?
I had an idea that I wanted to go office, ridge, office, ridge, and ridge encompassing the tent, and it was kind of like office, military, and just repeat. And I swear that's just about as much of an outline as I had, and I had to get it all out. And the way that, believe it or not, that was easiest was to, kind of max yourself out in one office, go to the ridge, max yourself out, get to the next office, max yourself out, and make sure at the very least you're just paying attention to the transitions and that things are linking up in more than a half-assed, forced way. And that's literally how I went after it.
Next question. All the way, you, sir, in the middle. Sorry to repeat the question. The question was, did you ever interview any soldiers? They joined, they volunteered, they knew they could be put in harm's way.
Absolutely. I wasn't saying sent in any way that it was involuntary. I'm just saying that they literally had to leave their homes, get on, conveyances of some sort and go there. And it was somebody's decision above them to do that. Not in any way did I want to portray them as unwilling or not being mindful. Oh, absolutely. I mean, just the ones in my own family. My Uncle Bob is a soldier, and the two guys that we had on set who were in most every tent scene. We had a former Marine, Kevin Collins, who was was in the middle of the fighting in Fallujah, and another guy, Bart, who had been in Afghanistan and Iraq and spent a big chunk of time in Korea on the DMZ. And they kind of checked us at every point. If there was anything going on that they didn't think was, realistic, they, were paid to kind of raise their voice and call us on it. So absolutely, not only did we talk to them, they were on set every day.
Next question. Right there, you, sir, in the white in the middle in the back. Could you repeat about the kind of research that you did, how in the kingdom it also helped for this film?
Yeah, there was a guy named Michael Mann that made a phone call. Quite literally, he called Elaine Shannon, the woman who used to write for Time, and told her, I'm sending this all goofy looking Irish kid out to you. Can you show him around and take him to the places you cover? So it was just the kind of the most amazing opportunity that was dropped into my lap. She, over kind of a grand total of 3 weeks, over 2 or 3 months, took me into every office I needed to get into, kind of every office I didn't think I'd ever be able to get into. So that's how it was just, it was given to me, really.
And obviously you had written this after the kingdom, so...
Yes.
Yeah, kingdom was active. Another question. Right there, you, sir, on the aisle in the hat. Or ma'am, I can't see, there's lights. Questions in regards to timing. It is very snappy. The scenes don't overstay their welcome. Was there a lot of involvement for you during post-production to make sure it was staying snappy, or was that pretty much from the page?
Well, of course it was from the page.
I saw that one coming.
Is that what you mean by timing, or you... Oh, okay. Yeah, while I was writing it, I was really cognizant of not getting stale in any one spot, because that's, especially when you're, if you're gonna think you're good enough to jump around from 3 different stories, you better be good enough to jump around between 3 different stories. You better not overstay your welcome for fear that it just carries over into the next, into the next, and it's. But that's the writing of it, and then the editing. I mean, there are cuts and changes that are made in the editing room, and I went there a couple times. It was up in Napa. It was this winery that Redford rented out and turned into an editing suite. It's still one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen.
Where did you get that idea?
It's fantastic, And his house is up on the hill, and it's amazing.
Is that why there was a special thanks to Walter Murch, because you guys were up in his area?
Yeah, and he came in and helped out, especially with those ridge scenes, just to get those as clean and as crisp as possible. So yeah, that was a whole different level that I think just accentuated everything. Cuts that I hadn't thought about in the ridge, cutting back to the tent, back to the ridge. I didn't write it like that.
I've heard a few journalists kind of question, when after he falls out, the helicopter's still kind of moving, but they end up kind of close together.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the passage of the landscape put them really far apart? I mean, I'm guessing I'm guessing the helicopter was hovering. I mean, was that ever a discussion?
Yeah,
because it was kind of in a hover.
And the guy, Kevin Collins, especially from the Marine Corps, he said that kind of thing happens a lot more than you'd expect.
Okay,
that people are falling out and. As you're, 15, 10 feet, and you take fire or something, you hit some kind of, thermal or anything, that people fall out of helicopters. Not on a frequent basis, but certainly more than is reported. So, yeah, you can't quite see it because it's fog of war and it's dark, but I wrote it as, when they're about 25, 20 feet, that's when things go haywire, when they're right kind of point blank.
Gotcha.
With the Taliban, and he falls out. Ernie falls out because he never buckled into the gun, because the gunner is still on the buckle, still on the safety harness, and Arian kind of jumps out after him while the helicopter's still kind of trying to right itself, really.
Gotcha.
And then it swings away and takes off.
I had to bring it up. A few journalists were griping. You, ma'am, you were one of the last.
Is that what they're pointing at? I mean,
minor gripe in an elevator. Come on, out of the whole movie, that's pretty minor.
Okay.
Again, on the worry of it being outdated by the time it came out.
I didn't pitch it. I just put the script in front of him. Yeah, I just wrote it and put it in front of him, or was able to kind of get people to put it in front of them. And the timeliness, I think everybody had the same take on it is it's if things changed for the better, well, how can you really complain that now your script, the need for your script is obviated? You know, that if things got better, then okay. If things got worse, which there's a debate right now, if things got worse, then there's even more kind of reason to go forward with it. So we certainly kept an eye on kind of current events and things that were changing, but...
Was there anything you added during production?
No.
Okay.
No, there truly wasn't. There was the bit that I postulated about Iran. I'm not patting myself on the back at all. That kind of came to fruition while we were shooting. So we had this kind of, I guess you can call it fortunate, although it's an awful word, this fortunate kind of piece that I added because I was just thinking about what might things look like, and that came to pass. It's an awful thing to kind of hope for, but so that's why we're kind of searching the papers every day while we were shooting.
Another few questions. Right there, you sir in the eye on the white. Question is, considering you have family in the military, the decision when soldiers were being shot at from mosques in Iraq to not flatten them from that kind of gunfire.
Well, I mean...
If I'm repeating the question correctly.
No, in all honesty, if it's my Uncle Bob, I just think who's a saint, a wonderful man, and he's being fired on from anywhere. Mosque, church, hospital, school. I would certainly hope that they would do everything they could to pinpoint where they're being fired on. But tell you, if it's an American life on the line, I'm personally for taking every action to save that American life. If that includes flattening a mosque through air power, and that saves American lives, I got to tell you, as unpopular as this might sound, I'm for that. I especially if it's my family on the line. Man, I don't know how you couldn't be for something like that. But I would hope that you'd take every precaution to make sure you're not killing innocent people, that you're not hurting innocent people in any way. But again, it's warfare. If it were only that easy, it wouldn't be called warfare.
You, ma'am, on the aisle. How involved were you? How much of a say did you have of any changes?
Well, because it was a spec script, and I was in the really fortunate spot of, especially once Meryl Streep gets involved, and then once Robert Redford gets involved, you can kind of name your price at that point. So I just said, I'm also a producer on this. And so that kind of mandated my involvement.
What'd you learn as a producer?
That it's exceedingly difficult. And it's a double-edged sword because I had a baby in Chicago, and most of the time I just wanted to get the hell out of there and go hang out with her. But again, it was relative to the kingdom. It was this amazing kind of increase in responsibility, and you realize very quickly that the script is less than half the battle. I mean, that there are things happening day in and day out that will determine the quality of your movie, and they can be very mundane things. So there's kind of a constant vigilance.
Give us an example.
The one that pops to mind isn't for mass consumption. And it certainly wasn't mundane. Just, very simple things like the sketches of the first sketches and the first kind of templates of the berm. Everybody kind of approves, and then we get out into the Santa Monica Mountains. As beautiful as it was, it really didn't look anything like they had sketched. So you completely have to start reorienting and reorganizing everything to kind of still maintain some of these beats in the script that are integral to the story, that absolutely depend on the physicality, on the physical layout of that berm and of that ridge. So those things, it's like, these kind of daily surprises that if you don't roll with them and somehow surmount them, your film becomes less than.
Well, it's good that you weren't thinking about them when you were writing the script, which I find interesting that you wrote in Chicago, which was the place of civil unrest during the Vietnam War, the protests and the riots.
Well, that's a subject kind of, right in the middle of the Carnahan family, because my dad, before he went to Vietnam, he was essentially just out of basic training, and there was a shortage of riot police, and he and his buddies and his guys were sent up there and worked riot patrol. So, wow,
I'll bet those are some stories you could use for another movie.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and so that is kind of always bounced around in my head.
What'd you learn from working with Robert Redford? He's a great actor, director, producer, the father of Sundance. What'd you learn from him as a storyteller?
That he's just so handsome.
Good stuff.
Yeah. He's like I said, and all this probably sounds like pablum because you hear it on these red carpet, stick the microphone in your face, and everybody was such a joy to work with, but the guy, I kind of think of him like your favorite uncle. Was
there any collaborative moment while you were making the film where he gave you just another great note beyond that phone call that opened your eyes to something you hadn't seen in your own script?
All of the stuff that I asked him once just what he's thinking of when he's directing. I'm fascinated by that process and what goes through his mind. And he really basically said, I never try and get too far away from this tenet that what's the kind of the emotion of the scene on a really easy, basic level? Anger, love, hate, fighting for your life, fear. What's that emotion that's running through it? And then just try and think where you would put the cameras and the lighting in a way to best accentuate that. So you never have to worry about the emotion behind the words. And I thought that was just a really simple way for me to kind of make peace with, one of these, my own interest and my own kind of fear of ever directing anything. He just has, and then his stories are phenomenal. I mean, stories about Jeremiah Johnson and 3 Days of the Condor and The Candidate, when he was doing this whistle stop tour, and it was this really novel publicity tour for The Candidate, and two of the guys, the guys that were hired by the studio to market it, were political consultants. And they were telling him really early on, this Watergate stuff is for real. It's absolutely for real. Keep your eye on it. These two guys at the Washington Post that everybody in town thinks have their finger on the pulse. It's absolutely for real. And that was, 3 years before Nixon bows out. 4 years before.
And then he was in All the President's Men, of course. So,
exactly.
Wow.
So, he's just got these phenomenal stories I love the fact that the guy, it's that line Meryl has at the end, which is kind of an homage to Redford, that the guy will take a punch at anything if he thinks it's justified, if he thinks it deserves it, and regardless of what you might think of him, if he feels like it's the right thing, he's going to do it. And there's something to be said for that.
You were talking about your thoughts on directing. Is that something you want to do?
Oh, not anytime soon.
All right.
Not anytime soon.
You know where I'm going for this next one. We had you 3.5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
We ended that last Q&A by talking about your adaptation of the book White Jazz with your brother Joe, who's going to direct it.
Yeah.
3.5 weeks later, give us an update on that project.
Yeah, we're minus a star. Yeah. Let me take a drink of water first.
Yeah, there's a few things in the news I might have seen.
Yeah. I'll just say it was the strangest thing and so oddly kind of handled that to this day my brother still has not talked to Clooney about it. Clooney didn't call or, heaven forbid, come over face to face. He sent his guy. And
his guy, Grant Heslov, his co-writer of Good Night, Good Luck?
Yeah. And that was that.
You sent Heslov what, with a briefcase and there's a message inside? I mean...
No. Quite literally, hey, I'm in the neighborhood, can I drop by? Quite literally. So, sure. And then, oh, by the way, our guy's out. It was just a strange, I still don't know what to make of it, but that's how things work. That's how things work, and I don't know what the rationale is. I don't know if it's, Michael Clayton. I have no idea, and everybody's got a theory. But I will say there are several actors out there that are interested in playing Dave Klein. It's hard though, because you write that thing with an actor in mind, and then that actor says yes, and you're over the moon.
So what's the status of the project? You're looking to recast?
Well, it had cast. Jessica Biel was going to play Glenda Bledsoe, which I thought was a phenomenal choice, and her audition was head and shoulders above everybody else's, and it has money behind it, and it has a crew, and it had an office, and they were set to start shooting in the very beginning of January. So now it's in limbo, and the tough thing is my brother. Paul Cameron was going to shoot it, and my brother hectored him into not taking another better paying gig to shoot it. So it's that kind of thing now, where it's just a strange goddamn thing.
Those Carnahans are trouble.
They really are.
They're trouble.
Yeah. Clooney's saving himself a lot of heartache. Yeah.
You're heartbreakers. We're 2 days before the strike right now, while you still can comment, because I don't know what happens about the writers being able to comment after the strike. I think
we're
hairy.
Immediately taken out with a sniper's bullet.
Yeah.
It's just,
what are your thoughts about having to stop working on everything you're working on? Because I'm sure it's hard. I mean, the strike, there's very good cause, but I mean, creatively, just forgetting the business for a second, I'm sure you're in the middle of projects that you'd love to gun ahead on.
Yeah. I mean, the one that the two that are staring me in the face are the Zebra Murders, which...
Give us the pitch on that.
Yeah, as far as for hire gigs, it's a single greatest idea or concept I've been given. It's a true story. Between 1973 and 1974, 6 African American young men, members of the Nation of Islam, Temple Number 26 in San Francisco, over 10 months between 73 and 74, quite literally went around San Francisco attacking and killing white people at random. And ostensibly it was this effort to spark a race war, but it was never really that stated. It was never really that well thought out. It was just this kind of vicious episode in San Francisco's history. 15 people murdered, 8 injured, 2 paralyzed, and the city almost came apart. Mayor Alioto was issuing every African-American man a zebra card, and they could be stopped and searched by any cop. So habeas corpus out the window. It was and it almost tore the city apart. And that came right at the moment they started to make a few breaks in the African-American communities to get closer to these guys. And then when this happened, not going to help you anymore. And eventually the 2 cops kind of most instrumental in catching these guys are African American themselves. And in the middle of their own civil rights lawsuit against the San Francisco Police Department, launched for a lot of the same reasons these other idiots were killing people. The youngest of the 2 cops goes on to become the first black chief of police in San Francisco's history. And it's this just phenomenal
story. That's a heck of a story.
That's been lost, I think, in Zodiac and Watergate and the tail end of Vietnam. And now the one I'm supposed to do after that is Guest of the Ayatollah. And the fact that here I've got these fantastic projects staring me in the face, and now I'm being told I can't do anything on them. Yeah, that doesn't. Something about that feels wrong. I get the arguments. I truly understand. I think I understand. The biggest issues at play and at debate.
You've only had your WGA card for about 4 years.
Yeah,
so I mean,
and I'm Writers Guild East because we moved from Chicago to D.C. about 3 months ago, and So a lot of what's going on out here, day in and day out, we don't get. We don't even get the written by magazines. Like that's how much animosity there is between Writers Guild East. But the East didn't want to give out the addresses of the membership when West was saying, we'll just give it for free. We'll give the written by magazines for free.
Luckily you have a comp subscription to Creative Screenwriting Magazine, and that's all you need, my friend.
Yeah,
but, I mean, so what would your strike duties be in D.C.? I mean, what could you do?
Like my
Picket,
wife
or do you
said,
have to
like
fly out
mow the lawn, like clean the house. No, there
You have to fly
no
out to
pickets
do strike committee duties, or
I have no idea. I really have no idea. There's the communication between East and West is so piss poor that I have to go kind of searching for it. I have to go searching for what the results of a town hall meeting look like, or it's tough. So I don't know what's going to be required of me, if there's going to be anything formally required of me, or what people would want me to do, or what I myself might want to do. I have no idea.
I look forward to having you back with whatever you do. You've been very generous with your time. Give it up again for Matthew Michael Carnahan.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to Matthew Michael Carnahan for showing up twice this year in the screening series. And hey, we can't wait to have him back. If you dug this episode of the podcast in general, consider tossing a virtual tip into our PayPal virtual tip jar by visiting www.creativescreenwritingmagazine.blogspot.com and look for the PayPal icon. Your tips are appreciated and definitely help out with equipment, hard drives, and all the other stuff we need to keep this podcast running. Of course, feel free to check out my blog, which I even managed to update on the rare occasion that I have time to do so by visiting www.jeffgoldsmith.blogspot.com. You can also always feel free to drop me a line by emailing me at yo.goldsmith@gmail.com, and I'll do my darndest to get back to you as soon as I can. Of course, don't forget to click that subscribe button in iTunes or your podcatching software, because that's how episodes are downloaded automatically every time you click refresh. And if you have a minute, feel free to leave us positive feedback in the iTunes Music Store or at podcastalley.com. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, thanking you again for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.